Hello and welcome to the second part of the video tutorial on how to make a nice fluffy kitten in Blender from BlenderDiplom.com. Again, I'm Jonathan Lampel, and in the first part we went and talked about how to add fur using particle hair systems to the actual kitten itself. So you can see here in our Modifiers tab we have these different hair systems, and in this part I'm going to go ahead and add a cycles material that will make this look really good when rendered. So but before I do that, I'm actually going to add a material to the skin itself. And the reason I'm going to do this is there are going to be parts of the cat that are going to show through where there's not going to be any hair. For instance, the nose, maybe a little bit around the eyes, or inside the ears, or just places like that where there might not be any hair, but you still want to see the actual color of what the texture is. So I'm going to set up a quick cycles kind of set up here. So I just bring the timeline up, split my window like that, dragging these little corner things here, and this just makes it really easy to work with my nodes, work with my materials. I usually keep this one in rendered view like that, and so I can make any lighting changes over here, see what it looks like over here, and it just works out very, very nice. So I already showed you in the first part that I have a texture already set up that will be in the blend file. It's called kitten fur 2 because the first one wasn't very good, so I had to do it again. This is, you can see it's just a pretty quick texture paint. You can see some seams a little bit, but it'll definitely do. Fortunately, when you're doing fur, it kind of gets blended through, so even if it's not perfect, it'll still look fine in the final rendering. So here's the texture, and you can see it's already UV mapped, UV unwrapped and all that stuff, so you don't have to worry about that. But I am going to change the color a little bit because I don't quite like the color. So what I'm going to do is add a color and RGB curves. Maybe bring up the whites and bring down the darks, and add a little bit of red. It's kind of like the orangey cat color. And just make a few tweaks. I mean, you can make it whatever you want. If you wanted to make it a blue cat, you can certainly do that. Do whatever you like, but I just kind of like it a little bit more orange. Okay, so we have that. That's pretty much our basic setup. And now we're going to take another material. Well, first of all, I'll call this cat_skin. Then I'm going to make a new material, copy that cat skin one, and I'm going to hit this 2, which makes it a single user. So whereas if we make changes to this node, it will not affect this. Then I'm going to rename this to cat_fur, and this is going to be our fur material. So if in the Modifiers tab I enable the view for the body hair, you can see that is now being rendered in the viewport, and that's very cool. It was a new feature which is now supported, and you can use it for CPU and GPU. It works really, really well, and I'm going to show you how to set up a shader for it to make it look all nice. So I'm going to leave this on CPU because I find that my screen is more responsive when it's on CPU. GPU kind of tends to lag a little bit. Alright, so we have it, and it looks pretty decent. But to get a really good idea of it, I'm going to add a lamp so we can have just a little bit of lighting. I won't go through a whole 3-point lighting or anything right now, but that'll certainly help. Oh, it looks like we already have a lamp. Okay, well then I don't need one, but if you don't, I suggest you add a lamp so you'll be able to see the reflections and all that. Okay, so now we have the very basic shader, but we don't really want it to be diffuse because now in 2.69 we have a special shader just for hair, and you could probably guess it, it's called Hair BSDF. So we can now plug this guy in here, and didn't make any change, and that is because in the properties here under render we're going to use material slot 2 instead of material slot 1. So you can see that that's the first one, that's the second, and we want number 2. So I can go ahead and do that for the fur Here, the whiskers, I'm actually going to have a third material for, so we can do that in a little bit. Okay, so we're all set up, and you can see what this first shader is kind of looking like. I can see the preview here. That's not a very, it's hard to see exactly, but it's kind of a mix between a, anisotropic and kind of a transmission. There's kind of lots of stuff that goes into it, but it's still in shader and it works very well. Instead of, before I had to set up a whole big node group, and that's actually what I was planning to do for this tutorial, but then this shader came along and simplified the entire process. So you could go ahead and just plug this in here, but it still doesn't look as great as it could. So what we're going to do actually is take a look at this hair shader node and see what we can do with it. So you can see that there's two options here for reflection or transmission. And it's, if you just kind of play with it, it's fairly obvious what they do. This one kind of gives the fuzzy, translucent type fur look, while this one is the more glossy type fur. And each node can only do, one at a time, and we actually want to mix the two. So I'm going to duplicate this. One of them is going to be reflection, and the other one's going to be transmission. Now, they each have these settings here, which the offset is just kind of the angle offset of the reflection. So similar to the anisotropic node. So I can, rotate that, and you can see how it kind of the reflection, or the way the light bounces off, is offset by 90 degrees. It's kind of weird, but that is what it does. The roughness in the U and the V, think of U and V like UV coordinates, same as like an XY plane, except they don't want to say XY because that would be confusing with the XYZ system. So they use UV, and the U means the roughness in the direction along the fur. So if you take maybe one piece zoomed in, this is the roughness in the direction going from the base to the tip, and you can see that's kind of glossy there. And the roughness on the V is the roughness sideways. So if you kind of zoomed out, say if I put this at 1, you can see it's no longer glossy from the base to the tip. And on the roughness V, if I set this, really low, you can see that it's more glossy on the width. So we definitely want to leave this at the default values. I mean, if you have different kinds of fur, you can play around with them. Maybe you want to set this a little bit higher if you want, a more fuzzy kind of effect. I think I'll actually leave mine at 0.2. Seems like a good medium, not too glossy, but not too matte either. Okay, so we have the glossy component, and the transmission. I don't think the roughness or offset really affects the transmission part at all. So this doesn't necessarily even matter. The only thing it takes into account is the color. So we want to take these two and mix them. And so, as I'm sure you're familiar with, you just go to Shader, Mix Shader, and plug them both into here. But instead of having a factor of 0.5 where they're just evenly distributed, we can actually go a step further and make it a little bit better, where we can add an input and hair info node. And we're going to plug in this intercept right here. And what the intercept is the basically the distance of the hair from, so like one part of the base would be, say, the black part, and then the tip would be the white. So as it gets closer to the tip, it gets more and more white. The value, it gets closer and closer to 1. So one of these is going to be mixed at the base of the hair, and the other one is going to be more towards the front. And if you kind of zoom in, you can see that right now the reflection is at the base while the transmission is at the tip. And I want to reverse this because I want the kind of the fuzzy part to be towards the body, and then the reflection, the kind of more glossy hair, towards the outside, as it would be on an actual animal. So that's real easy to do. Just change that to transmission and change this to reflection. And there we go. Now we have the transmission at the base and the reflection more at the tip, and it looks pretty good. I mean, just looking at it with no color, it's already looking nice, and we can go in and plug in this texture to the color there. And even though that's a really simple setup, it's already looking pretty decent. It's looking pretty nice. And now we can go ahead and tweak the actual parts of the hair. Maybe if you necessarily wanted it more glossy or what have you, you can certainly do that. I'm going to up the lighting real quick. Okay. You can play around with it, do whatever you'd like. But for now, I'm going to explain the different parts, because in the particle settings, you have two options here. You have Cycles Hair Rendering and Cycles Hair Settings. And the difference between these two panels is this top one here is global, so it affects all of these systems up here, while this one is more local, so the root and the scaling, all that stuff, only applies to this particle system itself, not all these other ones. So in Cycles Hair Rendering, we want to render with line segments. There are different types, curve segments and triangles, and I just like line segments the best. Triangles here, you can see, don't work with the intercept, so if you use that, then you kind of have to unplug that because it just works differently. And I want to use the intercept, so I'm not going to use triangles. And curve segments, while it does work a little bit more similar to line segments, I think it takes a little bit more to calculate, if I'm not mistaken. And I believe that there are, unless they fixed it, kind of breaks at the edges, which you definitely don't want. But it looks like, oh yep, there's still kind of gaps in there. So I'm going to leave this at line segments, and they're faster to render anyway, so it works out well. And in the shape, I'm going to turn this to ribbons. And I don't necessarily know all the technical back end of this. I do know ribbons is faster to render, and thick is more realistic, more think of more like a cone as opposed to a flat triangle. So it's more accurate. But when you're looking at hundreds of them right here, it's not going to make any visual difference. So unless you're zoomed in super close, it's not going to make any difference, and it's going to render a lot faster. So that definitely helps us. And this option for cold back faces definitely helps it render faster, because it's going to ignore all of the hair that's not facing the camera. So this hair back here that we're not seeing isn't even being rendered. So that's definitely going to speed things up. And the minimum pixel width means that if the hair is below a certain point, it's going to kind of converge, and that's also going to save memory and save time. So you can put it up a little bit, maybe like 0.25, whatever. For instance, that's the thing where if you zoom out farther, it's going to render that area a lot faster. But I wouldn't set it up too high, or else you're going to get some kind of funky results. But definitely keep that on. Okay, so now onto the Cycles Hair Settings, where we can actually tweak these. The shape is the same as in the children. Oh, it looks like I'm in the whiskers. Hold on. Or in the children, where the shape kind of pushes the angle towards the front or towards the back. So instead of, here, I'll just kind of draw it out for you. So, it'll make it more of a push it towards the base, or more towards the tip, like that. That's kind of a crude drawing, but that's basically what it does. And while we don't really want that, we just kind of want a regular triangle, you can definitely play around with that. the root is the size of the base there, and we definitely don't want it at 1. You know, that's pretty big. If you're standing this far away from a cat, you shouldn't see the individual base of the hairs. So let's lower that a bit, maybe try 0.5. And I think for this I'll go with 0.35. So that's looking pretty good. And the tip, we want to leave that at 0, so that means it's going to go all the way to nothing, right? And scaling is just if you have, you know, different objects, you can have different root size but still have them the same world size. It's more for more complex scenes. We don't really have to worry about that here. And close tip just kind of means that the tip is not open, but since it's 0, it's not going to make a huge difference here. So you can see we can kind of see through the fur since we lowered the root size. So we need to figure out how much fur we actually want to render. So in the children settings, we can just display, say, try 25. And we want to be pretty generous with this because you definitely don't want to render not enough fur. It's better to wait 5 minutes extra in render time than it is to, you know, render for only 10 minutes, but, you know, have a patchy looking weird fur. So 25 looks pretty good, but I'm going to keep it at 35 just to be safe. So we have some nice smooth fur, but that's, you know, that's looking really good. You can tweak the colors, you can tweak whatever you want, especially in compositing. That's a lot of what the other picture was with the colors. I just tweaked the compositing. But you can see that as fur goes, that's looking quite nice, and you know, lighting has a lot to do with it. So let's go ahead and take a look at this just to see how the fur shader works. So I'm going to duplicate this and make some backlighting real quick. Right, and then turn the world to 0. Okay, so you can see that it is you know, you do have a little bit of glossy. Maybe you want a bit more, depending on, you know, what kind of kitten you have. But you can see it's looking quite nice. Like that's looking good. So we can leave it at the values we have. And this same fur shader is, you know, is already going to be applied to the face and the paws. Because remember we did that, changed it to the second material input, so it's going to apply to the paws, it's going to apply to the face, and it's going to apply to this. I think that is the whiskers. Is that correct? Yeah. So it's not going to apply to the whiskers because we're going to do something different for that, and it's going to apply to the fuzzy ear hair. Okay. So actually the ears and the whiskers are going to be separate, but for now this is looking good. You can go through each of them, for instance the face fur and the paws, and determine how much you want to render to make it not patchy. For instance, we can go into the feet here, choose paws fur. See, it's automatically set to 100, which is going to be way too much, so I definitely recommend double checking these things. Otherwise, you're going to just be wasting a lot of time when it comes to rendering. Okay, so I think I'll leave that at 35 like the other one. And face fur. I think I'll leave that at, yeah, I'll leave that at 35 too. But with the face, you can see that it is a bit too big. The base, so we can go down here and change that under the Cycles Hair settings. It's still at 1 because remember this is the local, so it doesn't affect all of them. I'm going to change that to 0.25. So you can see that really thinned it out, so we're going to need to add more children in rendering. So I'll go ahead and add that 45. And then with the pause, we didn't change that either, so I'll change that to 0.35. I believe that's what the body was. Yep, that's correct. And now we can go ahead and do the whiskers and the ears. So I'm actually going to disable these so that it renders faster in the viewport. Alright, so first, whiskers. I'm going to add a new material and just call it whiskers. And you can see that since we set the particle system to material number 3, this is material number 3, and it is rendering just like that. We don't really need a, actually we could use a hair shader, may as well. Let's go hair. And we definitely don't want it to be quite so glossy, so let's bump up the roughness a little bit. That's looking good, but you can see that it's definitely not looking like a whisker, it's looking more like a ribbon triangle. So back in the particle settings, we're going to scroll down to Cycles hair settings. It's a bit too thick, so maybe 0.5. And this is something where it might be useful to have these be separate values instead of one for the entire scene, but you can see if I set this to curve segments, no. Nope. If I set that to thick, it looks more like, actual round hair, which would be nicer for this. However, that would change the entire scene. It would make all of these like that, which we don't need. And since we're not really focused on the whiskers, it's okay to leave it for ribbons, at least for me. So, again, you can do whatever you would like. But I think they're a little bit too thick still. So let's go with 0.3. Because we don't want them to be, super obvious, but just a nice little accent. So that's looking good. And now for the ears, we can change that to be the same material. Render material 3. And we definitely also need to change that because that's way too thick. So let's go 0.25 because it's usually pretty thin hair. And there's kind of a lot of it in there. Maybe even too much, so maybe you could go to no children at all. Well, you definitely don't want to render 100, that's for sure. Okay, so let's, because no children definitely is not enough, while this looks good, but I'm going to make it a little bit thinner actually, just kind of thin it out a bit. So 0.2, and that'll be good when it's combined with the regular face hair. Then it'll look fine. So now we can kind of add these back in, and you can see the result. We can have it's a very dark cat, definitely darker than mine in the preview. However, you can easily change that using this RGB curves right here. So if you want to, you bump up the brightness, make some S curves. And you can tweak the colors and things as you go, as well as the length of the fur, all of that sort of stuff. But this is basically how you would set it up for pretty much any project. And right out of the box, the fur is looking quite nice. You know, for just being the pretty much the basic shaders, and just sticking them together, this is looking great. Again, this is the preview, so there's not as much as would be in the actual render. But you can go ahead and play with this and get a result like I had with the exact same file right here. I did the exact same thing, changed a few colors. Both materials are in the blend file, so you could use this material if you want. Because I actually, since this is the preview, I have two of them. This is the one we worked on in the tutorial, while this is the one I had actually for that render, and you can see that there are these settings here. So they might be a little bit different. You can go ahead and play with them, see whichever one you like best. But I hope you learned a lot from this tutorial. I definitely enjoyed sharing this with you, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks for watching.